All right, how's everybody doing? This is Pastor Sincere, the founder of Fort Bend Transformation Church and the founder of Advocacy Now Institute, and also recently the founder of for the Center for Race, Religion, and Reconciliation, where we are really focused on bridging communities and bridging relationships instead of breaking relationships. We're also trying to foster a sense of belonging and healing and understanding. And so we started it several months ago. It's a new organization, the Center for Race, Religion, and Reconciliation. And we have a faith council that we put together, not only multi-faith, but then also individuals of various different religions. And we have real honest dialogue about real issues that our community faces. And we also have experts that, to give us presentations and to do webinars. And we also have a podcast where we're trying to educate the community about the things that we deal with on a regular basis in our society concerning race, religion, class, and religion. And so I'm so honored today to have my good friend, Teana V. Watson, Judge, Fort Bend County Law, number 5. That's right, number 5. And and she is really, really knowledgeable about the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is systemic racism in the criminal justice system. And I know I've had my own experiences with racism, not in the criminal justice, but my own experiences with racism. And so today I'm excited because we're going to have Judge Watson educate us on this subject. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to her. You can give us a little bit of your background and how you became so passionate about this subject.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor Sincere, Lady Sincere. I am passionate about not only this subject, but anything that can make humanity better, make what we do better, make the world a better place, make it more just and more fair. And there have definitely been issues that I think we need to address in the criminal justice system. I grew up in Houston. I'm a product of Sunnyside. Went to elementary school at Reynolds Elementary in Sunnyside, Woodson, Carter G. Woodson Junior High School, and graduated from Jesse H. Jones Vanguard Program, part of HISD's Vanguard Program. I think it's now Carnegie Vanguard. They changed it. Zone of Worthing, though, and still have my best friends who went to Worthing, and never forgot where I came from. Loved being in a community that embraced everybody. That's the thing about a community. You could be next door to your teacher, on the other side could be your preacher, and it also could be a young man that came back from Vietnam and he wasn't too right walking the streets and now he's drug addicted. We saw it all. Everybody was there, but it was what we did as a community to embrace all of that. You saw everybody from every type of illness to every type of education. We were all there. So that's my background. I left Houston and went to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee for undergrad. And why did I do that? Because I'm one of those people, why not? It was a great school, great experience. And Fisk University is a university that a lot of history came out of it, and people who were pivotal in African-American history, from Dr. W.B. Du Bois to Nikki Giovanni to John Lewis with the Civil Rights Movement. The sit-ins took place in Nashville, and many of them were Fisk University students. All the way till today, we have one of the 2 young men, Justin Jones, of the Tennessee legislature, that's doing all the gun protest. He is a recent product of Fisk University. It's a historically Black college and university, founded in 1866, just after slavery, one of the oldest. And we received lessons on Black culture and history. And we were taught it at every level. and that is at the level of the sadness and the violence of slavery, all the way to the sophistication of the Harlem Renaissance and the arts and the Fisk Jubilee singers that sang before the Queen of England. So we got it all at Fisk. We had mandatory reading. Interestingly, a lot of the books that they're claiming to ban, that was my mandatory reading before going to Fisk. We had about 11, 12 books that we had to read the summer before freshman year. The Souls of Black Folks by Dr. W.B. Du Bois, The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morrison. Some of these, I'm listening to them say that these books, I'm like, oh my God, that was mandatory reading for me going to college. But anyway, that was a wonderful experience. I knew I had an affinity toward law. And when I graduated, I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I also liked public policy. So my senior year, going into my senior year, I spent a summer at Princeton University in their Woodrow Wilson School of Policy, International Policy and Administration. That was a wonderful program. I was a Woodrow Wilson Sloan Fellow, and that policy and that program got me for the first time on the East Coast. And so I was there walking the lawns and getting the education of Princeton University. And just to date myself, along with Michelle Obama at that time, we're the exact same age, and Brooke Shields, by the way. But that was monumental. I knew then that I loved being on the East Coast for a lot of reasons, the energy, the movement. I always liked the movements. And I knew I wanted to go to law school in New York. Syracuse University, I was poor, offered me the most money, offered me scholarships. And it was 4 hours from the city. I didn't want to be in the city because the city was rough. It was getting a little rough and it got rougher. And it was a perfect fit for me. I graduated from Syracuse Law School. Law school took great care of me. And at that, before I did graduate, I was able to intern at Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which was huge back then, and it still is now. I interned in Manhattan DA's office. John F. Kennedy Jr. was also there at that time. I'm dating myself, and had a wonderful experience in New York. But as I stated before, I was broke and needed to come back home. I actually had quite a few hours in the Maxwell School at Syracuse because I never, ever really abandoned my love for public policy and administration. I was in a dual degree program to get a JD and a master's in public policy and administration, but being broke, I decided to just finish up law school and go home and get a real job. I went straight through school. That was hard, y'all. Yeah, you know, that was hard. There was no money in between. So long story short, I came back home. I actually attended some classes at U of H because I had something to finish up on. Passed the bar, started out in the DA's office in Fort Bend County. I was in private practice for a little while before starting with the DA's office in Fort Bend County. And like they say, the rest is history. Back then, that was, you're talking about 1991, I was the first African-American female DA employed by the DA's office in Fort Bend County. And I'll be talking a lot more about that. But that essentially, I was a prosecutor for 5 years. I was a chief prosecutor. And after that, I started representing people charged with crimes. And you'll hear about my experience there. So from 1996 to when I took the bench in 2018, I was a criminal defense attorney. And I have the perspective of a former prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, but just being in the system, period. So with that, if you want me to get started, Pastor, I want to talk a little bit about the history of race and the criminal justice system in America.
Please, it's your show. It's your show now. We've turned it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I think one of the reasons we have to look at why we're even talking about this, why it's important, is because of the disproportionate numbers and the disparate impact it's had on the African-American community. And if we're looking at justice, we have to look at the why. We have to examine the facts, and then we have to look at the why. African Americans make up 13.4% of the nation's population. However, we make up over 22% of the shootings, fatal shootings that take place, fatal police shootings. We make up over 47% of wrongful convictions and exonerations, and 35% of the persons that are executed on death row. African Americans are 5 times higher, have a 5 times higher rate of getting arrested for offenses than white people in America. We are arrested at a 5 times higher rate. And so how did we get here? How did we get to these hugely large, and we'll look at a graph, numbers of incarceration and persons who are on bonds, probations, and paroles in the African American community. Some statistics say that out of Black men, 1 in 3 have been involved in the criminal justice system at some level, if it's not arrest, bonds, or probation, or parole. How did we get there? Well, we have to first look at the history of America's problem with race. And we have to be honest about it, and we have to acknowledge it. It started back in 1865. It started with slavery and the sins of slavery. And what happened is slavery had an order to it. The order was clear. It was a slave master, and the pecking order: if you were Black, you were the slaves. If you were the children of the master and the slave, you were still likely a slave. You could be in the field as a slave or the house as a slave, but nevertheless, there was an order. And there was an order in the South, and everything was controlled, and then there was discipline. There was discipline and control. And we're gonna hear those themes throughout when we talk about and examine the history, again, of race in the criminal justice system, now African Americans in the criminal justice system. And that is discipline and control. So, Emancipation Proclamation came, 1865, and now these people who you had all this order over and you had all this control over are free. They are now, many of them, without a place to go, without work. Many of them are walking to where they're going. They're released from the plantation. And you have a lot of Black people moving around, and you have no order. Dr. W.B. Du Bois stated in the Black Reconstruction of America, the slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. You think about that. That's deep. A brief moment in the sun and move back towards slavery. So what is he talking about? Well, following the Civil War, the large amount of African Americans that were going around and walking around and trying to get and find their way was disturbing to the Southerners who had control over them. And they needed to find a way, construct a way to control and discipline. And so in the South, they came up with certain things such as Black codes. Black codes were laws that were designed to keep the free Black man in his place, or in her place for that matter, but mostly it was the males. And so the South legitimately, as they were able to do, came up with vagrancy laws. These laws stated, such as all free Negroes and mulattoes over the age of 18 must have written proof of a job at the beginning of the year. If found without no lawful employment, they were considered a vagrant and convicted. So that was one of the ways you could get arrested and placed in prison. Many of them convict leasing programs, prisons that said, well, you violated the vagrancy law. You're going to have to work now in this prison. And in many cases, these convict leasing programs were worse than slavery. They were treated worse and so on. We have them in Sugar Land and Fort Bend County. We had the history of one such program. And there was evidence of young men, much younger than 18, that was put to work, placed in these deplorable conditions, and killed basically at an early age for the hard labor from being in these convict leasing programs. So this was for real. This was a way, and this was a legal way to keep these young men under control and discipline. So as constitutional amendments guaranteed African Americans equal protection of the laws and the right to vote were made, they were essentially worthless. The white backlash against Reconstruction gained a lot of steam, and Black people once again found themselves again powerless and regulated into programs like convict leasing and having to be arrested on issues of Black codes, curfews, and in other ways to restrain them. Now, that's Reconstruction. That's after 1865, that's going into the early 1900s. And in the South, pretty much we lived like that. There were obviously separate facilities, restrooms, schools. You could not go to the same hotels. You couldn't eat in the same places. That was, here again, the order, the way of life in the South. And so Black people were still, although quote unquote free, relegated to a second class status and a place in society where they could not have the full freedom of humanity of everyone else. And so we all know that movements were stirring, and they came to a real fruition getting into the 1960s. And ironically, that's almost 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation when you think about it, and it is. There have been movements before, but not with the strength and not with the impact of the civil rights movement. Many of those movements took place out of colleges, took place out of unions, took place out of churches and groups that were tired and sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so what came from that was civil rights legislation. And that legislation was affirmative actions to try to give African Americans, or to give African Americans some equality. And that's in the school systems, the accommodations, housing, and so on. And that was to address some of the inadequacies and delinquencies of the past 100 years. So that was the 60s, and that legislation was positive. However, President Johnson, who was very instrumental in getting the civil rights legislation passed, at the same time had a platform called War on Crime. And we start seeing this platform of leaders talking about law and order. And we start seeing that get more traction. So after President Johnson and after those very important and positive civil rights legislation, we got President Richard Nixon nominated as president. And he had a policy he called the Southern Strategy. That policy was designed to assist, again, the South in getting order over, let's just say, the environment and the situation that it's in now. And that's having to face African Americans shopping, going to school, and now African Americans having at least the appearance of some equity in churches and everywhere else with white people. So this policy was designed to make sure that everybody was comfortable, or to somehow address what was happening at the time. He also started a policy on the war on drugs. So now you start seeing national policies that say we're going to address crime more. However, I looked and researched, it's unclear exactly what was going on in history that these policies were based on. In other words, the policies were very clear, but the only thing I could see that they were addressing that makes sense was a lot of young men were coming back from Vietnam. A lot of them had mental issues, drug issues, addiction issues from having served in Vietnam. The baby boomers were in their, if they were born in the 50s, they were like 20 now. And of course, we have, you can say maybe some economic issues. But we had some strong policies. Policies such as marijuana was classified as a Schedule A drug. This is 1970. Congress passed the Controlled Substance Act, which established marijuana to be in the most restrictive category, along with heroin and LSD. So if you were found, and many of the, especially young men who had been to war and had been in certain circumstances, and here again, developed some issues where they felt the desire, need, or PTSD to have marijuana, they were given very long prison sentences from the 1970s and from the policies. And we have to remember these are policies that were taking place at that time. Also in the 70s, we had social issues such as white flight. Now that the civil rights movement have allowed African Americans to buy homes and eat in restaurants and do certain things, we had a lot of the Caucasian neighborhoods now move out of the city in Houston. That would have been like South Park and even the McGregor area, and move into farther out into like the suburbs. And so now you have the white flight and African Americans were moving into those areas, for example. And another phenomenon you had in the 70s is you start having police chiefs become mayors of large cities. Once again, keeping with the theme of law and order, which we'll see how that theme with the policies affected the African American community, and specifically criminal justice and race. So the 70s, you start seeing how things are starting to shift. 60s, you had civil rights movement. 70s, you start seeing policy shift a little to be more restrictive. And then we started getting into the decade of the 80s. And the war on drugs is truly considered a war. And you have under President Ronald Reagan, a lot of Southern Democrats turning Republican. You have racial undertones in the campaigns and in the slogans to move people to go a certain way. And you have it all cloaked in a war on drugs and policy of law and order and fighting crime. These policies are starting to now, and this is the 80s, we'll get there more, disproportionately impact African Americans. The police are becoming more militarized since there is now a war on drugs, and they're going into neighborhoods, mostly African American. SWAT teams who were used originally was for very hostage and serious situations are now being used in African American communities for drug trafficking and drug charges. And people are getting arrested and largely due to drug possession, although they would say some of it was delivery and drug dealers, but these were pretty low-level people, and they were thrown in jail for a long period of time in prison. In every year between 1980 and 2007, Blacks were arrested nationwide on drug charges at rates relative to the population that were 2.8 to 5.5 times higher than whites. So from 1980 to 2007, African Americans. Now, that statistic, that's an FBI statistic, also reveals that this rate is given the same amount of offenses committed with the data by Caucasians, but Blacks, African Americans were arrested at a higher rate, 2.8 and then sometimes 5 times higher. So we see now that in some of these cases, many of these cases were marijuana. Again, we'll have to go back to when they released or removed marijuana from being Schedule 1 penalty, like LSD and heroin. But when it was still Schedule 1, people were having these very long prison sentences, federally and otherwise, for marijuana use. During the 80s, and with the keeping with the law and order thing, we also saw on the presidential level, and this is where media is so important, candidates started using words and tones and codes and so on when talking about law and order that actually had racial undertones to them. Specifically, there were ads that had taken place. One was former President George H.W. Bush campaign used a Willie Horton ad against then Governor Mike Dukakis, and a nationwide presidential campaign to make Governor Dukakis appear to be soft on crime. And that's a very valid issue in a national campaign. However, the ad depicted a Black man, Willie Horton, and it also stated while he was on a furlough, which was a program that Massachusetts had, that Willie Horton raped a white woman and stabbed her boyfriend. And so that depiction, along with the fact that Governor Dukakis was governor at that time, was enough for people to hesitate on Michael Dukakis, and many theorized caused him the election. Many people believed that the fact that the pictures were used and the fact that it was under a law and order thing showed here again the use of race in America and politics to stereotype and bring an image that later was successful in seeing how African Americans are depicted in America. Now, for my purposes, I graduated from law school in the 90s. And so I have a real clear personal picture of what the criminal justice system looked like in the 90s because I was involved in it. Even from law school, I worked in the DA's office in Manhattan. I clerked in the clinics in law school. And I can tell you that the big issue the 90s brought was the issue of crack cocaine in the African American community. I personally was one of a few interns that was able to get the first tour in Rikers Island of a female unit of females who had been addicted to crack cocaine and had babies while in the prison. The prison unit actually had cribs where the mothers could still be mothers. And the whole theory was this: If we just allow the mothers to have the baby and take it, then there will never be the bonding that is needed between those 0 to 3 years. And the mother will not be bonded with the child and will be able to get rehabilitated better from her drug addiction. And so this was a pilot program, but the mothers, many ladies were pregnant from the crack epidemic. And yes, they had their babies and the mothers were in the prison at Rikers Island. So crack cocaine hit the African-American community, not just males having an addiction issue, but also females. Prior to 1990, we can say arguably when we're talking about the criminal justice system, it was mostly males involved. But the addiction of crack cocaine put women at a much higher rate in the Black community. And so also became mass incarceration. People who needed treatment were sent straight to prison, and the prison sentences for crack cocaine were much higher than persons who had been sentenced for powder cocaine. And here again, this is from policies. These are policies that on the federal level, Congress put together, and on the state level, state legislatures. And so we all knew, and they knew as well, that crack cocaine was mostly associated with African Americans. It was cheaper, it was more easier, more accessible, and powder cocaine was mostly connected with wealthier people and Caucasians. And it took less of the substance of cocaine for crack cocaine, for the making of crack cocaine, than it did for the powder cocaine. However, the sentencing for crack cocaine was in some cases 3 times to 5 times higher than for the same usage of powder cocaine. And that took place for at least 10 to 20 years in the federal system as well. And personally, I had to deal with it. By this time, I ended my career with the DA's office in '96, and I started representing people federally and state. And it was people getting 20 and 30 years on cases. They were putting people away. A lot of people, they were not real drug dealers. They may have been, at best, somebody who may have been a supplier, but they were getting sentences as if, like I said, they were somebody that was at a higher level. And most of these people were African Americans. So there were many African Americans that became part of the criminal justice system in the 90s. And if Ms. Sincere, we can get the graph with the jobless rates first, we can see how that affects people once they have been incarcerated. So you may say, oh, well, okay, they did their time, they were in, so what? I mean, life goes on and they can go on and, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is this. Formerly incarcerated people face an alarming rate of joblessness. They really become disenfranchised from society. You tell them they can't vote. You tell them that they can't be in many places. And proof of this, and this was something that has been, and I'm going to try to remember to use and mention all my sources from the Prison Policy Initiative. What would happen after someone is released from prison in regards to their ability to get jobs? So this is from a graph that is time since 2010 release. So these people, if they were released from 2010, and we're looking at a very good low unemployment rate we're in right now, we're going to get to that. 6 months from release, they're at 62% jobless rate. Now, we say jobless rate because many of these people are probably not even counted in the unemployment numbers that you hear about. 1 year from release, 63%. 2 years from release, 64%. 3 years from release, 65%. 4 years from release, 65%. So that's how many of these people cannot find jobs after being released. And the US peak unemployment rate during this time period is 15%. So these are the people that are existing in the margins. These are the people that probably are not even in that 15% unemployment rate. These are people who do not have jobs. So when you say, oh, those crack cocaine people who were arrested and sent to prison for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they're out now, what's the problem? Many of them are not able to enjoy just even an ability to get a job. Thank you, Ms. Sincere, for that. So this is a problem. This is a problem in the African-American community. This is part of the, where race is a factor and was a factor in the criminal justice system. These policies disproportionately impacted African-Americans in sentencing in these crack cocaine cases. And these people were affected for the rest of their lives and their families. Many of these men were fathers. If they were not fathers before they went in prison, they became fathers after. In many of these homes, they're fatherless. The women are having to bear the burden of everything, and the males are not able to become productive and breadwinners for the family. So it affected the entire community. And treatment was almost never an option or talked about. I even have had people in my treatment court in Fort Bend who were older, and they have been in and out of jail with their addictions. And they told me this was the first time I was ever even offered treatment. And they had criminal histories. And I have had grown men, yes, Pastor Sincere, grown men your age, seriously crying and saying, thank you. You never even gave me the opportunity to get treatment. That was never an option. It was go to jail. And they did, and go to prison. And so what we had also in the 90s, with all that was going on, you had police brutality. Now I can tell you as a criminal defense attorney, I had a lot of young men, and they would tell me just like this, boy, those laws really beat me up this time. Oh, they really got me, da, 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 da. And I'm like, I just heard that from such and such. Do they know each other? And I'm looking at the identifiers. There's no way these two people know each other. Then I'm talking to another client, and it was like, boy, they kicked my butt. And I'm like, I keep hearing this over and over again. And I'm seeing, oh my God. So I explained to them that there's a process, that they can file an IAD complaint and so on, and they just always shake their head like it was useless, worthless. And I'm like, wow, all of these people are saying they are being brutalized. And then, out of nowhere, a man on his balcony was adjusting his camera, and he honed in on some police officers in Los Angeles. And they were beating this Black man, and he honed in, and he got the videotape, and we got Rodney King. The brutality of Rodney King, and how surreptitiously, how that happened was from somebody who just happened to have a camera on his balcony. And we saw what happened to Rodney King. And we saw that it appeared that it was not isolated. No one appeared to be appalled when it was happening. And the officers were later acquitted. That was for America and for most people, the first time they saw a visual of, quite frankly, what my clients had been telling me for years. And all I could do was say, wow. And then we witnessed the riots and the desperation that people had. And I personally thought about my clients who, after it happened, and I'll be honest, they did look beat up. A lot of them did have black eyes and all that. And I'm just like, wow, really? And you saw why the things happened that happened, the helplessness that went with it. So I'm deep in my career as a criminal defense attorney now. And we see that certain neighborhoods, mostly African-American, were being policed a lot heavier than other areas. We're seeing certain communities, young people are stopped. And if they had the smell of marijuana in their vehicle, the vehicle was searched and they were going to jail. Maybe not prison, but they had to do their walk. And so young people and young Black males specifically almost looked at jail as a rite of passage, something you just have to do, because it was happening so much. Everybody was going. And so I'm not gonna say what's the big deal, but pretty much that was the thought. And so we started seeing policies again that was disenfranchising these young people. If they had a quote unquote criminal record, they couldn't get certain jobs. If they had drug offenses, they had to move out of housing, necessary housing that their parents and their moms were in for years. They couldn't vote. They were marginalizing them from society, having them feel that the only way they could feel like somebody is they had to play basketball or be a rapper or have something to do with drugs. Because the policies were so harsh, it left them with very little opportunity for anything else. The war on drugs in the United States was waged overwhelmingly against Black Americans. Although there are more white drug offenders than Blacks in the United States, Blacks constituted 62.7% of all drug offenders sent to state prison, and Black men are sent to prison on drug charges at 13.4 times the rate of white men. And I'll leave our sources again at the end, but this is from Human Rights Watch, Punishment and Prejudice, May 2000. So what was the effects of all this mass incarceration? Ms. Sincere, if you could put up that second graph, please. The Vera Institute, which anybody can Google them, they do great work, put this graph together. This is the US prison population. You can see where we were in the 70s. You just went through the history. And you see the 75, you see 80, you see 85, you see 90. And we're gonna keep going, but I just want you to see this graph. We went from under 200,000 in 1970 to 1.2 million by 2010, okay? And these are mass incarcerations, disproportionately African-American males. So the numbers don't lie. We have become a country where we have used our policies. Our legislatures have used their policies and powers to punitively incarcerate people for longer periods of time than any other country in the world. Okay, if you want, you can remove that if you wish. So, we're at the decade of 2010 now. I think we may have finished with 2000, we did. And I call 2010 the say my name, say their name decade. Because literally that's what we did. The feds now have expanded their targets that just happens to disproportionately affect African Americans to Medicare and Medicaid fraud cases. They have now come down some on the marijuana and the disproportionate cocaine cases, or at least talk is starting to have take place that the crack cocaine cases did disproportionately affect African American people when they were sentenced 3 times higher than powder cocaine cases. And so there were some moves, but at the same time, as we see in history, where there are progressive moves, there are also regressive policies. And so another phenomenon took place though, and I don't think many people realize the intended consequences, and that was technology. We are in an age now where cameras have become prolific and is a prolific tool in what is really going on in the criminal justice system and policing and just in the world, period. And so we started out 2010 decade with a young man named Trayvon Martin in 2012. And Trayvon Martin's case was a young man who was visiting his father in a gated community, coming back from the store, purchased Skittles, an Arizona tea bottle. And a white man who presumably lived in the area did not recognize him and confronted him. An altercation ensued. The young boy, not knowing what's going on, defended himself. Mr. Zimmerman was able to take that action as aggression against him and killed him. And we then all learned that Florida had laws called Stand Your Ground, which, when you go through the history of the fear and the aggression that the country has had toward Black males, it becomes somewhat clear of what that law was designed for. And in Trayvon Martin's case, it was successful in that Mr. Zimmerman was acquitted based on Stand Your Ground law. I think the young man was either 12 or 14 at the time. But I say your name because after him it was Eric Garner, a guy that was selling Lucy cigarettes outside a store in Staten Island. Why? Probably that's the only way he could make a living. And the police arrested him. And in the process, Mr. Garner was handled in a way where he was not able to breathe. And he said it. Lucy cigarettes, citation, offense in New York. Not even sure you go to jail with that type of case. It's probably a finable only case. But Mr. Eric Garner lost his life from the handling of that case for selling Lucy cigarettes outside a store. Then we had a case of Michael Brown, a young man in St. Louis who had some disagreements with the store owner, was later killed, left out in the street, and a huge outcry on how that was handled. We have Philando Castile, a gentleman who actually worked at a Catholic school and was an upstanding citizen who was in his car from a traffic stop, who acknowledged, I believe, as he was supposed to, that he did have a gun, because he rightfully could, and was killed during that traffic stop with his wife and child in the car. And then, of course, we had Sandra Bland, all in this decade of 2010, a young lady on a traffic stop who probably only crime really was getting smart with the cop, arguably. But nevertheless, was taken to jail. Ms. Bland may have had some other issues going on, most people do. And as a result of that incident or that encounter, was found dead in her cell because of hopelessness. Some of these were found, and some of these we saw as a result of the police officer's body cam. And we witnessed the behavior. Some of it was from another phone camera. Some of it, and we'll find out later, is from Ring cameras, from residents having cameras. But now we're able to see all the things, at least folks like myself, who have been talking to people for years. We're able to see now, we're in a decade, what really happened and what really transpired with these people, and in many cases, law enforcement. So with the proliferation of alternative media sources, such as cable news outlets, social media, people are now able to face the story and put a person with the story, a biography with the person, age, work, mental illness. We're able to see the criminal justice system more than an institution of arresting people, plea bargain, jail, probation, and prison, but as a means to, in many cases, to an end. We're able to see the criminal justice system as a means to many people's end to their life. It could be as a result of a casual encounter. It could have been a result of a traffic stop. But for many African Americans, it's proven deadly. That's how we closed out 2010. And where are we now? 2020. The unthinkable happened. Just when we thought we saw it all, we heard it all. And many of these names, quite frankly, I have not given their just due to, because we don't have time. But we all witnessed a murder. A murder of a 6'3" man that supposedly, allegedly gave a merchant a $20 counterfeit bill, which we still have never determined if it was even counterfeit. And number two, for you to be charged with counterfeit, you had to have intentionally, knowingly did it. And there's no evidence that he even knew it. In other words, any one of us could pass a counterfeit $20 bill. If we don't know it's counterfeit, that doesn't make us criminals. But nevertheless, we witnessed him in handcuffs. We all know it. Walk out the store, a human being. And after an encounter with police that took place less than 10 minutes, we witnessed the life of this man snuffed out of him. Now, that was from a bystander's phone camera. I'm not sure if we ever saw the officer's body cam. We may have, because there were several officers involved. We know that. But that was the criminal justice system working under what they felt was color of law and policies to arrest a man and handle him. The trauma from George Floyd in 2020 is still something we are contending with Black males and people today. This video is being aired in 2023. A lot of folks do not understand the impact that had on African Americans. Able to see it on your cell phones, your laptops, the news, everything over and over again. And to try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. what it did was many of the efforts that had been made and are still trying to make with law enforcement and African American community, it affected them. It pushed it back. Let's face it. People who have had mentally ill sons and daughters are less apt to call the police in fear of what will happen. And we know that has happened when the police have any encounter. Young men who are stopped on a traffic violation had not committed any serious crime. They are scared. They are running. They don't understand. They cannot make sense of it. But yet, these things happen in America under the criminal justice system. So we are here today. We've had more mass shootings. There's more guns out on the street. We've had other males killed from traffic stops. Dante Wright, just to name a few, and it's so many and you can't name. And we have young people who really, when you look at it, there is a sense of hopelessness from the system. We have snatch and grabs going on now. We have people who they don't feel like they're going to get a job. If they get a job, they don't feel like it's going to amount to much. They have that sense of hopelessness. And the criminal justice system in America has affected and has been part of the reason for many of these people to feel the way that they do. So I know it's 12 o'clock and I can talk a little bit about solutions, and that will probably be a positive way to end it. You know, I think that the community policing is something that is a good attempt, but it's hard right now. I still think that people still remember George Floyd. I think that that trust factor is gonna take some time. I think that the systems have to be broken down, and people have to remember that systems are replaced by people, and that electing people to replace systems is important, and the power of the vote is important. Acknowledging the past, acknowledging that this is America's past, that race has been a problem and continues to be a factor is important. Acknowledging trauma. We don't do that enough. We don't acknowledge that that whole George Floyd, it messed a lot of people up, to be blunt about it. We don't acknowledge that enough. Treatment is extremely important. Locking people up has not been the solution. I'm going to go ahead and now leave my sources because one of the sources that I have is so important. Talks about assessing the prison experiment, and it goes through a whole, it's not even that long of a paper talking about how unsuccessful prison has not even been a good deterrent, especially not when it comes to drug cases at all. And restorative justice, restoring people back to humans, back to full citizens of society. So important. But I want to thank the Vera Institute of Justice, the New Jim Crow book by Michelle Alexander, and Crime and Punishment in America. That's a NewYorkTimes.com book, and probably other sources that I can't even think that I've kind of perused over the years. And let me know if you have any questions.
Wow, I'm just sitting here processing, and you need to go on tour because you did a phenomenal job, and we're definitely going to get this out on social media and send it to our partners by email. But I'm just sitting here processing, and the one thing that keeps coming back to my mind over and over again, Judge, is what is it about us as Black people that have made great strides and have contributed to America in so many different ways, that we would be treated in this manner, dealing with institutional racism, structural racism, racialization, all of these different things. And I keep asking myself, you know, the question, and I know that, I don't know if you're going to be at the meeting next week, Saturday at with the NAACP, but I'm going to quote W.E.B. Du Bois, right, in Souls of Black Folk, when he asked this question. He says, well, what does it mean to be a problem, right? What does it mean to be a problem? And it seems like that for no apparent reason, at least on our, looking from our perception, that why are we treated this way? And so I wanted to see if I could get you to respond to that. I love studying social pathology and all of these different subjects. And so what is your take on that?
Well, it's multifaceted, but one of the things, you know, we have a capitalistic system of government, and capitalism in its true form, there has to be poor for there to be rich. Everybody cannot be the same. And so there is a structure in place by nature of it being capitalism, that some people will have to be at the bottom and others at the top. There are other structures of government out there, but if you study capitalism, I think that what I'm saying is fair. And so then when you peel that away, I think there become issues on, well, then who's going to be the poor? And who are the people? That's the key. Who are the policymakers? Who are the legislators? Who are the folks in charge that is constructing the policies that can have an impact on who those people are? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. But in that, let me ask you this question, because you got me. I know we're going a little bit over time, but I have you now. So if I could just take a few more minutes. So I know that we had our first Black president, and his name was, we said he was a Black president, but he was really white, you know, a Caucasian, and his name was Bill Clinton. And so my question is this, the policies that you articulated today, was it just under Democratic presidents or Republican presidents, or how did all of that impact presidents and the policies that they advocated for?
So you can have a policy, and the policy could have a good intention and still have a disparate impact. Okay. All right. And so now we look at the policy, obviously, afterwards, you know, in the rearview mirror. Okay. Actually, I'm one of the people who I was on the ground, okay, in the 90s, okay, and I know the outcry the community had on making sure that a lot of the crack addicts, that's what they called them, get locked up, because people were getting older and they were scared. They were in their houses. Many of the ministers were right there saying, Mr. Clinton, you got to do something. Y'all not doing enough. There was an outcry in the community for very punitive measures to take place. And it was there. I was there. I heard it. And part of the outcry was this: you're not in the community. You don't know. You don't know what we're going through. And I have to say, I remember my father in Sunnyside. He is World War II, stayed in the service until he retired after putting 40 years in the service. My father was 6'1", 6'2", a built man. if you used to see him. And, and each time I would come home, I came home from college and, everybody getting a little older. And then I come home from law school, and each time I saw him, and then next to him, I'm just being honest, the brothers next door got caught up, and one of the times I came over, my daddy was starting to be an old man, and he always kept his gun next to him when he slept, and then the burglar bars were on there and this and that, but my daddy was real. He was smart. He was street smart and all that. He knew he gave them our jobs to do. He gave them just little enough, this and that. But after a while, he was like, this is all around me. And what happened is we knew these people from growing up, and your thinking is they're not going to do anything. And thank God they absolutely did not. But, a lot of old people, when everybody start wigging out and, and they start basing out and they start looking like that, they were scared. So my point is this. Yeah, there were some policies under President Clinton that had a disparate impact, and we can go back and say, they all of that, and I got it. But he was definitely addressing a concern at that time, and it was loud. The outcry was loud.
Amen. Amen. Okay, so I have one other question, maybe a couple of more questions for you. But so we also had a Black president that was a Black president. Mm-hmm. And he was Barack Obama, right? And I've heard people tell me that, well, y'all had a Black president and we don't have racism anymore, and all of this stuff about Blacks being killed by white police officers is it's blown out of proportion, and all of this stuff. Y'all have a strong middle class, and you have more success than ever, more businesses, and so we've kind of got past racism, and we can be colorblind. Right now we can be colorblind. And so I wanted to just get your opinion on that. Black president, you got a Black judge, first African-American lawyer, district attorney, and female district attorney in the DA's office, and all of these different things going on. But how is it still impacting Black people today? Is it, with quote some of the success that we've had in American society?
Well, the numbers don't lie. I mean, they are what they are. People can, leaders can only do so much. I preside over the cases that come before me. We do all what we can do, and we have to, understand we need everybody. That's what I tell my young people all the time. Everybody to do something, and that means if you can only just vote, then vote. Do that. But the numbers are there on the mass incarcerations, and just even what we're doing now, educating people that these issues are there. Some people don't know. That's the other thing. And they do believe in their world that everything is fine and they have progressed and everything is great. And so you just have to keep moving. You have to keep pushing on. People, movements take place, but you got to keep moving for a movement. So you can't stop. The civil rights movement, when you think about it, I mean, it actually was going on about 15 years before it actually went into fruition. With certain people doing things, really, Rosa Parks was not the first person to sit on the bus, and other things were happening. So, the theory is, it was 1865 and 1965, and that there's going to be another shift. If you just look at it historically, and it may be in the next 20 or 30 years, we may not be here, but That's why you have to continue with movement and resistance. Because if you stop, other people are still moving. And if you don't resist, other movements are still taking place. So, and that's what's happening, with the ban on books, and rewriting history. So that's the key. But the statistics, are the statistics.
Yeah, I know we have Michael with us here today. I would like to give you an opportunity to ask a question. If you, I know that you've been taking it all in and you're processing like I am. And here again, we're gonna get this out to on social media as well as some other different avenues. But go ahead, sir. If you have a question for Honorable Judge Watson, feel free to ask her any question you would like.
Not really. I don't have a question for her, but I am so impressed with the chronology that she has just laid out. And your questions, she answered very well. I don't think there's anything that I did not follow from what I have heard. So I really, I can only say thank you. And I wish, yeah, I'm glad you say you're gonna put it on social media.
Okay.
And I would like for people to watch it. And short, but very chronological. And thank
Yeah,
you, Judge.
absolutely. She did a. I'm like, do you need a venture capitalist to help you go on tour, or because you did a phenomenal job going through the history? I thought that I had Michelle Alexander, the author of the New Jim Crow, sitting right here because she's high. Bring her in. But no, you did a wonderful job, and we thank you for joining us today. If someone needs to reach you, or they would like to for you to do a presentation at their church or their organization, how would they reach you?
So my email, which is in the chat, and you can get it out, is T like Tom, V like Victor, Watson, law at gmail.com. That's TV Watson Law at gmail.com.
Well, man, this has been an exciting session. I've learned so much, and it's really heartfelt in terms of what is happening to people of color, especially African Americans in this country. I know that I had the honor for a couple of years of working with Judge Watson with the Exposed Excellence Program and trying to disrupt the school to prison pipeline and develop a program that is still going on and doing phenomenally well today. She is dedicated for the cause, and we appreciate you so much for the work that you're doing in the community, and here again the presentation that you gave today. If we don't have any other thing, now here's one question that I over the years I've asked anyone that I've interviewed. Even going back to my Sincere Media days, I used to have a small media production company interviewing individuals in the Tray in Third Ward. Here's my last question for you. If you had one question to tell our audience today about the subject matter that we've talked about today, if you had one opportunity to give them a word of wisdom, what would you give them?
It really just goes back to staying informed. Stay informed about what's going on, who's in power, and the policies that are taking place. the history of the policies in America were designed for discipline and control. And everyone needs to be aware of what's going on in their world.
Amen. Amen. I'm Pastor Sincere, the founder of Fort Bend Transformation Church and Advocacy Now in the newly formed Center for Race, Religion, and Reconciliation. We had the honor of having Judge Watson with us today, Fort Bend County Law Court 5. And she did a wonderful presentation on systemic racism in the criminal justice system. We thank you for having us today. You have a wonderful day. It's beautiful outside, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. God bless everybody. Remember that God is able.
That's right.